Well, let's talk about dividend policy and how companies pay out to investors. And when we talk about dividend policy, one of the things I think that it's a little bit confusing, I guess, is that when you talk to people about dividends, they think about the payment that they receive. But we want to change it. We want to look at it from the other side of the coin, if you will. How do companies, how do managers think about dividends? What is that process? In the end, how does that affect value? So where do dividends come from? They come from the free cash flow of the company. They can retain free cash flow, invest in new projects, maybe increase their cash reserves, or they can pay it out. They either pay dividends or they repurchase shares. So let's think about or talk about first the process of paying out shares. There are 4 dates that are important. The first one is the declaration date. And of course, on this date, we're going to find out what the amount of the dividend is and when that dividend will be paid, which is the payment or the payable date. Now, who's entitled to the dividend? Obviously, you have to be a shareholder, but you have to be a shareholder of record. So if you can imagine the company has some form of a book, your name has to be in the book so they can write you a check. And so the announcement is going to be, we're going to pay a $3 dividend on December 2nd to all shareholders of record as of November 17th. Now the challenge is, when does your name get in the book? It takes a couple of days for that to happen. So by tradition and also by necessity, there's something referred to as the ex-dividend date. So if you buy this stock prior to November 15th, you will receive the dividend. If you buy the stock in between the 15th and 17th, you will not receive the dividend, even though you are the shareholder owner. And we'll talk about what happens once you receive that dividend, or how that process works. So sometimes companies pay special dividends. They could be larger than usual. We're going to talk in the end a little bit about stock splits. But what about a return of capital? Instead of paying dividends out of earnings, what if they pay it from other sources? What if the payment comes from the additional paid in capital or from the reduction of assets? This is a different type of a payment, if you will, to investors. Also, a return of capital, a liquidating dividend. Maybe we liquidate a business or a segment, and from that segment we send distributions to shareholders. So dividends can come from and have different characteristics, if you will. Share repurchases is just another way to get money to shareholders, right? In this case, we're going to buy back stock. So we're going to use cash, and we're going to purchase the shares from outstanding shares in the public. Now, there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can do this through open market repurchases, and that's where about 95% of all repurchases happen. The company just goes to the market and they buy it back from the stock market. An alternative way might be to do something referred to as a tender offer. Essentially, we offer to buy the stock of shareholders for a specified amount, and usually it's going to be at a premium. So we're going to offer these shares, offer to purchase things back at a premium, and hopefully everybody agrees to this tender offer. And sometimes whatever they can get back, they'll buy back, and then they'll go to the marketplace and buy more if they have cash left over. And sometimes they might just cancel that offer, and ultimately then obviously no buyback occurs. Well, why might they want to do these share repurchases? Well, there's lots of reasons why they might want to distribute money instead of dividends distributed to shareholders. But 2 of them that we can talk about is something when we want to go to a specific shareholder. So we have a major shareholder who, in management's view, is being a little bit cranky, and they're providing challenges to us. They're an irritant. So maybe we purchase this stock directly from that specific shareholder, or maybe we purchase these shares from a specific mutual fund company. So we can identify who has these shares and then offer them specifically in the form of a targeted repurchase. Now, green mail is a little bit different. This is where we're going to try to avoid a takeover, or maybe management's worried about losing their jobs because major shareholders are upset with them. So what we're going to do now is we're going to offer these major shareholders to buy back their stock. And we might do this at a very large premium over the current price. So again, we're kind of blackmailing, if you will. We're going to call it green mail, a major shareholder. So again, they kind of, get off our back and they leave us alone. So let's think about some different types of dividends and share repurchases. So firms like me, they have $20 million in excess cash. They have no debt. Equity cost of capital is equal to its unlevered cost of capital is 12%. So they have three things that they can decide to do. They can pay the dividend with extra cash. They can share repurchase. Or they can issue stock and pay an even higher dividend. So with 10 million shares outstanding, they'd be able to pay $2 immediately. And the firm expects, again, with this projection of future profits, that they'd be able to have future cash flows of about $48 million. And if it pays a dividend from them, it could pay $4.80 per share each year thereafter. So what happens under the alternative policy 1? They pay the dividend with the excess cash. What's the value of the company? So the cum dividend price, that's the price before the dividend, is roughly $42. It's the $2 they'll pay today plus the present value of all the future dividends, so it's $42. After the ex-dividend date, what happens to the price? Well, as soon as they pay the dividend, this $2 is no longer available. So the present value ex-dividend after the dividend is $40. So in a perfect capital market, when a dividend is paid, the share price drops by the amount of dividend when the stock begins to trade ex-dividend. So on the ex-dividend date, the stock price is going to drop by the amount of the dividend. Now, instead of paying the dividend, what if we repurchase shares? So with an initial share price of $42, we'll buy back 476,000 shares. That's only going to leave 9.5 million shares left over. So what happens to value? Shouldn't be surprising, again, that this repurchase is going to have no effect on the stock price. So after the repurchase, the future dividend would go to $5.04 because they have the 48 million that they can pay. Now we have lower number of shares, so the price goes up, and the share price now is $42 per share. So again, in a perfect capital market, an open market share repurchase has no effect on the stock price, and the stock price is the same as the cum dividend price if the dividend were paid instead. So again, the idea here, the process is that changing dividends is going to have no impact on value. Now, what do investors want, right? We've talked about this process before of creating our own cash flows that we might desire. In a perfect capital markets, investors don't care what the company does, right? They can themselves create the cash flow that they want. In this case, they can create a homemade dividend. So if the firm pays a dividend and the investor would rather have stock, they'll just take the dividend and purchase additional shares. And likewise, if the company doesn't pay a dividend, but they want a dividend, they would sell shares in order to get the cash flow that they needed. So now there is a trade-off though, right? There's a trade-off between current and future dividends. If we pay higher current dividends, our future dividends are destined to be lower. Why? Because less money is invested in assets to generate future cash flows. And likewise, if we pay lower current dividends, future dividends will be higher, because in the end we would have greater cash flows to ultimately pay to our investors later. So again, in general, right, in perfect capital markets, if you hold the investment policy of the firm fixed, the company's choice of dividend policy is irrelevant because it doesn't affect share price. So that's the initial video on payout policy and dividends.